friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about how you can make your own dried milk powder. And we're talking about dehydrating, not freeze drying, since I don't have a freeze dryer, nor do I have interest in one. I'm mostly doing this for those who cannot afford to buy a freeze dryer, but either already have a dehydrator or can at least afford one of those, because they're a fraction of the price. And yes, it can be done. I've done it a couple times now. And actually the only reason I'm doing this is just to show you it can be done. Even though when it comes to dairy powders, I do still like to purchase it, because around here, buying fresh organic milk, raw or not, is very expensive. And so it's worth it for me to go ahead and buy a good quality organic milk powder like I get from Azure Standard. And I also have buttermilk powder here. Yes, you can store whole milk powder without it going bad. It does not have to be that nasty fat-free stuff. And anyway, it is super simple. So right here in this half-pint jar, and I have it filled clear to the top, is at least 4 cups of whole milk. I didn't want to do a ton since, again, I actually stock up on it already. But this will just give you an idea about how much space it can take up. I think it's more than 4 cups, but I know it's at least 4 cups of whole milk in this half-pint jar. Now, some of the images I'm going to show are from the first time I did it before I got my silicone sheets, but I do recommend going with the silicone, because when I was doing this on the plastic sheets that came with my Nesco, some of them were warped with use, and so the milk was running off of there, because they're also very shallow. They don't have a nice defined lip like these here. Now, as far as the round ones that go for a Nesco, I only know of the Bright Kitchen. I don't know if there's other brands available yet. But as far as the Cosori or your Excalibur, I have the Cosori and I do have the Bright Kitchen. So I purchased these, but since I did that, there are now other brands out there that are selling them for cheaper, where you can actually get a whole 6-pack or even an 8-pack of the Cosori or the Excalibur at a much better price. So I'll be linking to those down below so you can check them out. I'm happy with the Bright Kitchen, but I'm also happy to try to help people save a little bit more money. Now, you don't have to use the silicone when you're working with liquid. Some people will use parchment paper and then fold up the edges in such a way. Personally, with something quite as runny as milk, I wouldn't bother. I would personally stick with the silicone. So if you think it's something you're going to be doing a lot of, I do recommend investing in the silicone for whichever dehydrator you have, because overall it's going to be a good investment, and over time it could very likely save you money. If you have a Nesco or any kind of stackable dehydrator, when you're talking about something as runny as milk, the stackable ones are easier to use, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that your dehydrator is where you want it to be when you turn it on. You'll put your first tray on, you'll fill this tray up with milk, then you'll put your second tray on, empty, fill it up with milk, and so on and so forth. Now, when you're talking stackable though, wherever your heat source is, most of the newer ones have the heat source at the top, then you're always going to want to be checking that top tray first. And as soon as the top tray is dry, then you're going to take that off and then check that second tray and see if it's dry yet. Now, you might find it's dry in places, in some places it's not. You can break that up and take the dry pieces out and then leave the more gummy pieces that aren't fully dry yet in there. And then what I do is I never go above 115 degrees when I'm dehydrating anything where I'm using plastic or silicone, or it's something where I'm wanting to keep it raw. So in that case, I do not go above 115 degrees. And all these things I'm using either the plastic trays with the silicone or the silicone on the stainless steel. So I don't like to, even with silicone, even though it's supposed to be safer at higher heats, I still try to keep the heat lower. Now, when it comes to using a cabinet style dehydrator like I have, when you're talking liquids, some things like eggs, pureed tomatoes and so on, I can go ahead and pour that onto the tray because they stay viscous enough that I can pour it onto the tray and then put it, as long as I keep it close to my dehydrator, and have the dehydrator open and ready to take the tray, and then carefully slip the tray in there without spilling. I actually do better that way than trying to pour it into the tray when it's in there and just slightly extended. But when you're talking about something as runny as bone broth or milk, you definitely don't want to do that. I tried it just to see, no matter how careful I was, I still ended up spilling all over the place. So in that case, what I did was I stuck the tray. I did do the partway thing and then tried to fill that up. It's really hard to keep an eye on it and prevent it from splashing out the back. And even then, you just have to have it out a tiny bit, because you pull it out too far to try to get in there and pour that, it can still tilt slightly, causing the product to spill out the front end. So what I came up with was the easiest way. Takes a little bit more time, but it was the one way I could do it without spilling it everywhere, was putting the tray in all the way into the dehydrator, and then using this turkey baster, which obviously had been cleaned out well, and keeping the bowl or the measuring cup full of the milk or the bone broth, whatever it is I was filling, and just suck it up with the turkey baster and then carefully fill it, and keeping my eye on the edges to make sure I'm not overflowing, and look towards the back, because that's going to be the part that's not going to want to fill up right away. It does take a little more time, but I found that was the easiest way to do it. Now, as far as time goes, I think this last batch I did, it took only about 10 to 12 hours for the milk to get fully dry. A lot of times I just have my dehydrator automatically set at 12 or 18 hours, and I just turn it on. But you do want to keep an eye on it. And just like ovens, I would assume no matter what temperature you set it at, especially if you're using a stackable, you really got to keep an eye on it. Your cabinet styles will dehydrate evenly across all of the trays, where your stackable ones are only going to dry. Everything's going to be drying somewhat, but the ones that dry the fastest are the trays that are closest to your heat source, be it the ones on the bottom or the ones on the top, wherever your heat source and fan are. So those are the ones you got to really keep an eye on, and then just check it periodically. I would say at least 8 hours, and then after that, check it every hour to see how it's doing. And I do recommend, if you have some that are mostly dry, and you just have some gummy parts, like I said earlier, just crack it, break the dry parts off, and put them aside in a jar with a tight fitting lid until you're ready to powder, and then let everything else finish, because you're going to want to powder it all together. Now what I do is I do use my blender anymore, though I do have a coffee grinder specifically for grinding up food products. I only use that when I have a tiny bit of stuff to do at a time, but if I have a lot to powder up at a time, I go with the blender. It's much faster to do it that way. And it works really quite well to powder up your ingredients. And then at that point, if it's something you're going to stick back into long-term storage, what you're going to want to do is make some kind of barrier over the top of the powder. And that could be a paper towel, a muffin liner, even a coffee filter cut to fit, or like I do, I always have lots of cotton fabric on hand. I just cut pieces down to fit over the top, and then pack that in around the edges. Then I put my lid on, and then I vacuum seal it in place. So if you don't have that barrier over the top of your powders, what's going to happen when you go to vacuum seal, it's going to pull the powder out of the jar, because remember, it's pulling the air, it's going to pull the powder too. That's going to create a layer of powder along the rim of the jar, which is going to prevent your lid from sealing. And even if it does seal, it's more of a false seal, and it will come undone. And I learned this through experience of dealing with powder. So putting that barrier over the top makes all the difference in the world. I still recommend leaving your jars out for a day or so and then testing them, make sure they're still sealed. And then if you want more information about how to vacuum seal, I did recently do a video where I compiled several different ways of vacuum sealing, ways that you can do it into one video. And I will link to that down below so that you can find which is going to work best for you. Getting an off-brand setup with a little pump included is the cheapest way to get started. In fact, just today or yesterday, I saw one of those off-brand setups, the ones with the handles actually on the top, that looks a lot like a food saver top. $16 it was on sale for, And that came with a hand pump, plus some lids and a few other little paraphernalia. But anyway, go watch that video if you'd like to learn more about vacuum sealing. And also right here is a video clip of me vacuum sealing some hazelnuts into a jar, just to show you my favorite way, using the brake bleeder pump and any of the jar sealing tops that fit over a mason jar. It can be Food Saver, it can be an off-brand. Any of them will work that same way. But yes, anything that has fat in it, including your nuts, your whole milk, your sunflower seeds, whatever it is, if you vacuum seal those up, that's going to prevent the fat in whatever it is you're vacuum sealing from going rancid, including the ground Italian sausage. That I definitely wanted to leave as much fat in that one as possible, because that's where all the flavor, the seasonings were. It was in the fat as well as in the meat. So I vacuum sealed those up with the fat. With the ground beef, I do drain off a lot of the fat, but still I don't hot water rinse out the rest of the fat. I leave some in there because that's best for flavor. As long as it stays vacuum sealed, no issues with the fat turning rancid. I've been doing meats like that in particular for a couple of years now with no issue. And I've also been vacuum sealing homemade jerkies that also have fat in it into jars, and have had them back there for 7 to 8 years. I still have a couple of jars left from 2017 where I did some elk jerky, and one more left I think from 2015 or 2016 where I did beef jerky. And still good. They're all still good. And also, I almost forgot to talk about ratios. So typically what you're looking at when you're talking about most dairy kind of powders, be it buttermilk or whole milk powder or even non-fat milk, the typical ratio to rehydrate or reconstitute is going to be 1/4 cup of your powder to 1 cup of water. And that's going to give you about 1 cup of milk, a little bit better than that. So that's a typical ratio. But here's the other thing that's just wonderful about having powders like this. You can make it richer by adding more powder, or you can thin it out by adding less powder. And a couple more questions I know people are going to ask. I have tried dehydrating my homemade almond milk, and while it dehydrated up just as well as the dairy milk, the cow milk, because it had so much fat in it, when I went to powder it, it turned to almond butter. It was tasty to eat with a spoon, but it wasn't something that would rehydrate or reconstitute well. I've also tried dehydrating heavy cream and got the same results. You can stock up on heavy cream powder, and I've been finding that even though I've got a lot from Hoosier Hill and Judy's online through Amazon, I'm finding Azure Standard is actually carrying quite a bit of organic dairy powders, be it cheese powder, buttermilk powder, and more. So please check out my link to Azure Standard I'll be putting down below. So if you can get a really good deal on milk, if you see it go on sale for a really screaming deal, get in there, buy it up, dehydrate it up. Again, you can can it, or if you have dairy animals, this is just another great way that you can put up your excess milk that you're not using up right away. Maybe you've made all the yogurt and cheese and so on that you can handle. Start dehydrating it and storing it away in jars, because even if you're getting milk year round from your dairy animals, you never know if something's going to go wrong. Maybe they're going to get sick and die. Maybe you can't afford to get more dairy animals. Maybe you can't do dairy animals anymore. It's always a good idea to put up your excess, because you just never know what's going to happen. You know, we have chickens. They're all getting pretty old now. They're still laying good, surprisingly, except for in the winter, obviously. I let them have the winter off. But eventually, they're going to start dying. And what if I can't replace my chickens for some reason? I like to make sure I put up a lot of eggs, so I'm not stuck having to buy them from the store. So I have some in my freezer, and just like with the milk, I have a bunch dehydrated in the raw form and vacuum sealed into jars. And if you're interested in that video, I'll link to it down below, as well as any other related videos you might be interested in. All right, now if you've been dehydrating any kind of dairy powders, please share with us your experiences down below. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.